Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here again. I was here in 2009, and I hate to say it, having a lot of the same discussions that we're having today. So what is going on? I've got about 10 minutes to cover this, so we're going to go fast. I think we all understand that we're at the cusp of a very transformative period in the history of our development. It is systemic. We see it in socioeconomics, sociopolitics, and as they relate to geopolitics. It's obviously in the environment, and it's in technology. And we're not entirely sure where it's headed, but we're pretty certain it's going to be a wild rodeo. So I think we need to look where we've come from in order to understand where we're going. In fact, there was a quote earlier by Theodore Roosevelt that said just as much. And I'm going to take you through a quick paleontological trip through time. And I like to start simple and small, so we'll start with the universe. Our universe was formed 13.8 billion years ago. It took 9 billion years for our solar system to form and our planet along with it. Just gas and matter at first, it took about 2 billion years for photosynthetic life to help generate the oxygen in our atmosphere. And for the next billion years, and 2 billion years actually, life existed only in microscopic organisms. 650 million years ago, the planet was entirely covered in ice. We call it the snowball Earth. And it was volcanic activity through tectonic plates that released the CO2 into the atmosphere and melted this giant sheet of ice into a vast planetary ocean. It took about 1,000 years. The balance of nitrogen, oxygen, CO2, water vapors, and argon constitutes a thin layer of atmosphere, which 580 million years ago led to the first multi-complex cellular life. And the period between 541 million years and 66 million years saw the most dramatic evolutionary, climatic, and geological transformation in our planet. Fish, amphibian, reptiles, and then birds and mammals all evolved during that period. In this span until present, there have been 5 mass extinction events. The Permian extinction event 252 million years ago led to 4% survivors. In fact, every single one of us today here are direct descendants of the 4% survivors of the great Permian extinction event. The last one was the 66 million years ago when allegedly an asteroid hit the planet and destroyed 76% of all living things, dinosaurs included. 6 million years ago, we evolved from the ape and evolved into anatomically modern humans about 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago, in the scheme or the timeline of the planet is like a nanosecond. We've barely even existed. I mean, if you were to look at the age of the planet as one calendar year and condense it between January and the end of December, the start of the planet would have been 4.5 billion years ago, going all the way to present. Humanity would not have existed until 30 seconds before midnight on December 31st of that geological year. Civilization, 1/10 of a second. During that time period, we've managed to pour so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere that we have fundamentally altered the chemistry of the air and the acidity of the ocean, choking it from its ability to make life. There's so much pollution right now in the oceans alone that by 2050 there'll be more plastics than there will be fish. We are presently experiencing the 6th mass extinction event. And scientists tell us that by the end of the century, up to 75% of species will have gone extinct. Let me see, I have a little water. Can I have some water? Mass extinction events take 10 million years to recover. This, of course, doesn't just apply to the animals. We're also seeing in the human world, thank you very much, 1/4 of humans, 25%, that is 1.7 billion people, are experiencing extremely high level of baseline water stress. This is leading to conflicts around the world. This entire map here tells you where the water-stressed areas are. And the ones that are particularly interesting are between Mali and Somalia, an area that has about 500 million people, where already biological, insect life, animal life, and human lives are migrating away from regions that are uninhabitable. This is about 500 million people. There are presently 70 million people that are either seeking asylum, refugees, or seeking asylum around the world. This is a refugee camp that I visited in Jordan that is home to 1.4 million people, almost the size of Munich that we hear today. And the UN tells us that by the end of the millennia, at the end of the century that is, we will have up to 1 billion refugees. By 2050, maybe 350 million refugees. This leads to a good question. Where are we going? There are 3 agents of change. You have elected officials, business leaders, and of course, the public opinion. In 2019, it took the voice of a 16-year-old Sweden to remind us to use our voice. We are reactive. We are certainly aware of the issues, and in many ways, we are addressing them. But this leads me to rule number 1. Just because someone is in charge, don't expect that they're going to know what they're doing. The reaction of the Prime Minister in Australia about the Australian fires was to say that he's hoping that they will increase their export of coal within the next 10 years. Donald Trump is dismantling decades of environmental policy in just a couple of years. And so it begs the question, when you look at the financial metrics and an economy that ultimately at the present is doing rather well in first world nations. We have a stock market in the US that is at record highs. We have employment rates that are hovering around 3%, both in the US and Germany as well. And yes, we understand that somehow this is the tip of an iceberg, that we're not actually seeing the full picture. And if the popular uprising that we're seeing in Chile, simultaneously in Paris, in Iran, in India, in Venezuela, and the list goes on, speaks to an environment of fear. People are internally ill at ease with what is going on. So this leads to rule number 2. Crisis management is not a strategy. Risk mitigation is. We have known for a very long time that these problems were coming. In fact, environmental science has predicted these phenomena, and we've seen them growing. And yet, of all the signatories of the Paris Agreement, which Mark just made allusion to, only 26 of them have met the mandate. This was 5 years ago. I was in Paris. It was probably one of the greatest moments in the history of the environmental movement, and yet only 28 nations have met their mandate. All we need to do if we want to see where the planet will be with high levels of CO2 is to take a little time machine called geology. Through paleontologists, we are able to measure the levels and the temperatures that date back to hundreds of thousands of years, in fact, up to millions of years. And 3 million years ago, the planet had essentially the same level of CO2 parts per million in the atmosphere. We're presently at about 412 parts per million. 3 million years ago, we were hovering around 380 parts per million, so relatively similar. Temperatures globally were 2.6 degrees to 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit higher than they are today, and ocean levels were 16 meters higher. Paleontology gives us a time machine that can both travel in the future and in the past and help us understand what is going on. So this leads me to rule number 3. 21st century problems will not be solved with money. They need to be solved with attitudes. And in fact, if we recognize that the hallmark of a modern society has been to help us bring humanity to a level where human life is a human right, we're quickly devolving it to a privilege. And in fact, if you look at the amount of refugees around the world, it's becoming very clear that our system is unstable. And in physics, a subject that I've studied in climatology, you know that instability is always the precursor to a crash. And with that, I can't help but think that Marie Antoinette didn't lose her head in 1793 because she was living in a stable system. We are presently in a very, very unstable system that requires enormous amount of attention. And remarkably, we have a 100% successful plan for resolving the climate issues, and it's right here. It's essentially a smart grid, decentralized distribution of renewable energies, carbon capture and sequestration of CO2, circular and shared economy, reducing our waste, and e-mobility, zero-emission transportation. And finally, which I think is perhaps the most important on that list, is education. Science and technology will run the world, but the only thing that separates us from not being programmed by the computers that we once programmed is the one thing that makes us inherently human, and that is our empathy. Robots are taking labor away from humanity, which is essentially robbing away the one existential purpose of humanity dating back 2 million years. What will humanity mean when 70% of labor will be obsolete? Labor obsolescence will redefine the nature of what it is to be a human, and we need to be prepared with that by understanding what is the role of a human in society relative to one another and relative to the nature and the planet that we inhabit. Finally, we must make sure that within this entire educational framework that we're discussing even today, that the nature of technology is indispensable to our progress. But what is most indispensable to our survival is to reconnect ourselves to the environment that has brought us here in the first place. Finally, I will say that climate change is the one link that connects us to nature. If it breaks, we break. And in order to be reconnected with this nature, we need to understand how to be empathetical to all things, including ourselves, because we will not get to save ourselves and the planet unless we care for it. You know, I'll leave you with one quote from Churchill. He has so many great ones, but in 1941, he was told to cut off the art budget in favor of the war effort. And Churchill's response was, well, if we do that, what are we fighting for? And I would like to use that metaphor for this present age of technology, which is amazing as it brings all this tremendous amount of output and data and performance, and it takes away some of the labor from us so that hopefully all we'll have to do is basically play sports, write poetry, and have sex. But there's a price to that. And that price is going to be individual freedom. And the only way that we can protect ourselves from being robbed away of our liberal democracy so hardly fought is to understand the value of the human voice, its relationship to the other individual, and its relationship to the greater good, which is our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian Copeland, for showing these wonderful pictures and making us become aware of the problem. Our next speaker, Karl Ganter, he is the co-founder and CEO of Circle of Blue, and he will tell us more about how do we design water's future. Please give him a warm welcome.
All right, here we go. Since we're up. Okay, we're going to design water's future in 10 minutes or less. But we're going to start with, how many people are feeling hydrated after that? Everybody good? Climate change, everything else? If you're not, I'd suggest you seek some water, because the first sign of dehydration is dizziness and fatigue. Second sign, confusion, maybe a little hint there. Nausea, third. Blurred vision, okay, maybe a little sign of that too. Seizures and loss of consciousness, okay? And finally, death. Well, we have our little blue planet, which Sebastian so succinctly described here. And talking about Houston, we have a problem. We have a global water problem. Our blue planet's thirsty. Have we lost our vision, perhaps? So on our board is Jerry Linenger, an astronaut. He spent 4 months in this spaceship, the Mir, which was held together by his terms of basically duct tape and baling wire. And this is the response he gave me when I asked him about water, looking down in this blue planet, when on the space station, literally they made their water from sweat and urine in space. Talk about a circular economy, right? So a closed ecosystem, only so many sources of life-sustaining water, and all the creatures of Earth, just like the three of us circling it, all dependent on water. Imagine being in your own ecosystem, looking down on this blue planet. He actually ended up building a home on the shore of the Great Lakes, so he would literally always have fresh water outside his front door. So Jerry told me, he sent me this picture. These are dust storms starting over Inner Mongolia, and they blow all the way to Beijing, all the way to Los Angeles. So I asked Jerry, what would happen if I dropped a golf ball out of the space station? He said, well, that's not really physically possible. But, okay, theoretically, if I dropped a golf ball out of the space station, where would it land at the start of this dust storm? So we in journalism, I'm a journalist and photographer, we use a little secret. It's called IWT, and that's how we get our stories. I was there. So I went there, literally, to the location, and this is what I found. I found some of the biggest coal mines in China, powering China's entire GDP economy. This was, what, 5 or 6 years ago. And I also, up here, this is where I theoretically landed out of the space station, bounced a few times, but I landed in the front yard of Wu Yun. She's the daughter of an Inner Mongolian shepherd family. And Wu Yun told me about how their well had gone dry and how the coal mines have taken their water, both for processing coal and for cooling the power plants. So these are some of, I mean, we're hearing horrible statistics, right? I'm kind of documenting our own demise, but don't worry, we'll bring it around. So Sebastian mentioned how many million people will be on the move. This is a really scary number up in the upper right. 700 million people potentially on the move because of water scarcity or seeking water one way or another by 2030. That's in 10 years, folks. So I went to Sao Paulo to see where some of these people are moving to. So a lot of these slums in really poor areas, the barrios, these streets are named after the villages and the streets that they left behind in the drought-stricken areas of Brazil, literally in Sao Paulo. So severe water stress, so we're looking at what we call day zero cities, cities where some people may actually have to go further for water, or water scarcity becomes so high it really stresses the urban system. Some names that you recognize here. So something else we need to talk about too is make these connections. Climate is water. When we're talking about climate change, we're really talking about the impact on water. Will there be less? Will there be more? Droughts, floods? And how do we manage our pollution? Because if we had polluted water and less of it, there's less water for everything. So we're seeing more and more the future is here today. It's here ahead of schedule. And this is what I saw in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. So this was perhaps one of the last rice harvests in this region of the Delta because of salinification. The rice fields are actually turning brown. So they both pumped their groundwater as well as sea level rise. And that's happening now. That's literally the Mekong behind. This used to be a rice paddy here. So if we don't believe in sea level rise, just look at the Mekong. On that day, it was a new record of saltwater measured upstream on the Mekong of 78 kilometers. So this is Delhi. Count how many water tanks there are on these rooftops. And there are 2 people in the city down here on the right. So there are thousands of undocumented wells in many of the locations around the world, many of these large urban centers. This happens to be one in Delhi. So in many ways, we don't actually have the data to measure how much groundwater there is and who's pumping it and at what rates. Well, what happens when the groundwater is depleted? You turn to other sources. So this is a rice paddy north of Delhi, and it didn't smell like a normal rice paddy. It didn't even smell like sewage. It smelled like industrial waste. So I went upstream, literally, and this is what I found. This was the water source that they were using for their rice paddies. So heavy metals, all the other fun outputs and effluents from paper mills upstream are becoming their water source. Imagine that in the food supply, affecting the food supply. So Saudi Arabia, so this is a Somali farmer I found who'd moved from Somalia looking for more water and moving his sheep and becoming a shepherd in Saudi Arabia. So climate refugees. Australia is of course in the news, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. And you have people like Beryl Carmichael, who are Aboriginal elders whose entire history flows through water, and the Murray and the Darling rivers. Their dream time relates to water, and we can learn a lot about how they measure and how they value and how they manage their water supply. So Jakarta, probably most people heard that Jakarta's sinking. Most people heard that they announced they're moving the capital of Indonesia, right, from Jakarta. Well, in the morning they announced they're moving the capital. Don't hang out with me. I was standing, that's the famous seawall that wraps around Jakarta, right up there. So literally I got a text and I said, oh, I'm in the wrong place. The city's sinking. They're moving. So the world is not a click away. We talk about technological solutions. Well, some of the technological solutions are more behavioral and social than hard science and hard numbers, because sometimes our assumptions of data supply and data access are a little off of reality, perhaps. This is the data center at the Punjab Department of Irrigation. So I was really careful when I took this picture not to wake up the servers. They were asleep in the corner. Data joke. So what we also have, though, is we have people in some of the poorest parts of the world, the wealthiest parts of the world, who are, I would say, unempowered data collectors. We have to, as Sebastian said, we have to have the voice. That's our most powerful thing, the voice and the data collection and the stories. This river foams every day. Literally, the bottoms of my shoes fell off later. We're losing the battle, folks. How do we pull this back? Here in Jakarta, this guy delivers the water twice a day to his clients. That pushcart weighs 1,000 pounds or more. So we have the technology. What we have is really a catastrophic failure of public policy. We have incrementalism. We pilot project things. Instead of flying the airplane, we drive around in the runways. And we are failing. We fail in the water sector again and again and again. How do we turn this around? What's missing? Whose voice is missing? And how do we listen better? How do we take this to scale? Yes, we're the Marvel superheroes. Well, I think we're actually all here. That's what's really cool about the DLD community. Truly to take on these grand challenges, and water, I think, is one of the most productive stories for us to tackle, is to activate the collective genius of data experts, scientists, storytellers, young people, governments, companies, and the public. Not just tell them what to do with a new brand or come up with a new slogan, but give them something to do, a way to be relevant in the story. This is how we design water's future. We design it by understanding people's perception and comparing it real time to reality and understanding the context. What's that farmer thinking? Why is he pumping water 24/7 out of the ground to irrigate crops that don't need irrigation? Why is he doing that? Why is he not your champion? So using AI and different processes, we can do this much faster. We can course correct that airplane. So what we're doing is launching a project called Designing Water's Future. We did this 12 years ago out of the World Economic Forum. We're doing it again, but at scale. We didn't have the technology then. In our session in Davos, Mark Zuckerberg was in the back. I think he had his first hoodie then. So now we have all these new tools that are bringing us together to crowdsource stories and data, visualize in multi-dimensions in ways that we've never done before. Why is this technology just for the military and not for these grand challenges? And then applying this to a global academic design challenge. How do we tell this story better? How do we create the systems and the processes? How do we actually design water's future? So how many of you, if you have a blue card, everybody get it? Not everybody, but some people got a card. Okay, didn't have one for everybody. If you have a blue card, hold that up. Great, we've got some blue cards. So you guys are the listeners and the storytellers, okay? So those with the yellow cards, hint, hint, okay, those are the yellow cards. You guys are the scientists and the technologists. And you guys with the orange cards, what do you think that'll be? You're the designers. You're the ones that are giving us this processes, the systems designed to get us there. Not just a logo, but a design, a process. And then the green, You're probably just as important or more so. You're the connectors. You're the ones that are going to piece this together. So together, then, we are designing Water's future. If everybody had a card, I'd have you stand up and shout, I am designing Water's future. You can do it if you want. But truly, this is a quote from the Chief Creative Officer at Chobani. The only hope for Water's future is the one that we deliberately design. We can't be passive on the sidelines, nor can we expect our people on the ground, whether they're in the poor areas of Jakarta or on the shores of the Great Lakes. We can't expect them to be passive. We have to give them something to do because we are inspiring. We have a generation behind us that is truly inspiring. These women, young women, walk for hours a day near the border of Pakistan and India just to get water. And kids that grow up without adequate water, they grow up dehydrated, they actually grow up with a lower IQ. So, what are we adding? I would argue that we are all, and it's my personal mission here, is to make hope visible and make it actionable, make it move. Because we are designing Water's future because we have to, and we have to do it together. So I'd ask you all, this is your activation, what's your superpower? What are you going to add? So, thank you.
Thank you, Carl. By the way, we will be hosting a deep dive on climate change and sustainability with Carl on Monday, I think at 9 a.m. So please check the DLD app regularly. Next speaker, the chairman and founder of Idealab, Bill Gross. He will tell us how digital technology can make solving climate change a $1 trillion opportunity. Please welcome Bill Gross.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here. I believe that climate change is civilization's greatest challenge, but it can also be one of our greatest economic opportunities. And I actually believe it must be, because that's the only way I feel we're going to solve it. I'll tell you why I believe that and how. But first, let me give you a sense of what we have done. I think you all know, but I'm going to try and give it to you in a way that you can visualize it a little bit better. I think all of you know we make a lot of trash. Every person on Earth creates about 1 pound of trash every day. That 1 pound of trash, 7.5 billion pounds a day, goes into landfills. Less well known is how much CO2 trash each one of us creates. It's 31 times as much. Everyone on Earth makes 31 pounds of CO2 trash every single day. And those of us in this room, with a higher standard of living, probably about 5 or 10 times as much. So what's amazing, think about this. Every single one of us produces our body weight of CO2 and throws it up into the atmosphere. This is actually a visualization of that. That body weight of CO2 takes 100,000 cubic meters. That's actually to scale. That's the amount of CO2 you produce every single day. It's staggering. So the theme of the conference, what are you adding? Well, you're adding a lot of CO2. That's what we're doing every single day. And we're using this thin sliver of the atmosphere as our landfill for all of that. That's why we're creating so much damage. The extra heat that we're adding to the Earth, because of the CO2 we've placed up there, is equal to 3 Hiroshima bombs every second. It's just staggering how we're altering the planet with the CO2 that we create. All of you know the effects have been catastrophic. You've all seen these pictures. You've all lived these. The storms, the fires, everything. In fact, you saw this picture earlier today as well. But I don't know if everybody knows, 500 million animals died in Australia last month. Like, that's how staggering the results of this are. And that's going to come to humanity for a long time to come unless we change direction. The solution is just 4 words. Stop burning fossil fuels. That's the whole solution. But it's very, very hard because we love our lifestyles. Energy is the single most important industry on Earth. It accounts for all of our convenience and comfort and lifestyle. In fact, this is a graph of the GDP per capita of the world for the last 700 years. You can see it's pretty flat for about 600 of those 700 years. Then it takes off like a rocket ship in the Industrial Revolution when we learn how to harness cheap energy. Energy accounts for 10%, fully 10%, of the entire $80 trillion global GDP. And price really matters. This is a graph showing the market size of different forms of energy as you reduce the price. Every single cent of reduction causes $1 trillion growth in the size of that energy opportunity. That's how important, that's how much price matters. A penny equates to $1 trillion. And people are not willing to pay more. There have been protests all around the world this year. This is just 2 pictures of them, when even tiny increases in people's energy cost occurs in their environments. So how do we make renewable energy cheaper than fossil fuel? If we can do that, then we can solve this problem. That will allow us to stop burning fossil fuels, which is the solution. Well, I believe the answer is Moore's law. Exponential curves crush linear. Nothing has ever gone down as much or as fast in price or cost power as computing power. And businesses that smartly use that win. I believe we need to smartly use that to solve the climate change problem. All commodities fluctuate in price, whether it's fuel or coffee or sugar or beef. The only thing that consistently goes down is the price of computing power. And to vividly drive that home, I have a memory card here from 50 years ago. It has 32 wires by 32 wires and little iron cores. So it's 1,024 bits, or 128 bytes. And here is 128 gigabytes that you can buy on Amazon for $9.95. So in the last 50 years, it's gone down in size a factor of 100, it's gone down in price a factor of 100, and it's gone up in power by a factor of 1 billion. So we have more than 1 trillion times more computing power per dollar. Nothing in history has ever gone down 1 trillion times in price, let alone just in our lifetimes. That's what I feel we need to harness. Obviously, many other things in life have harnessed that. I feel we need to harness that in the energy domain. So how can we use technology, computation, this powerful Moore's law, to reduce energy costs? And what are the big problems that we need to solve? Well, the first one is energy storage. And I'll tell you why energy storage is so important and how Moore's law can be used there. Energy storage is so important because in 2017, we reached a major tipping point in all of history. For the first time ever, we could produce energy from renewable sources cheaper than fossil fuels. Coal is 6 cents. Combined gas is 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Wind is 3 cents, and solar is 2. So basically, renewables have won, but just at the wrong time of day, because they only occur when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. It turns out it's actually more expensive to store energy than it is to make energy. So if we could have a way of storing energy that was cheap enough, and here's the cost of storing energy. Lithium-ion batteries are 25 cents a kilowatt hour. We need to get down to 3. And currently the lowest cost of energy storage in the world is 17 cents a kilowatt hour, which is pumped hydro, which is pumping water up a hill, letting it come back down in a pipe to generate electricity when you need it. Pumped hydro needs that mountain, and we don't have any more places to build that. I started looking, I talked about this a year ago at DLD, at ways to build a pumped hydro plant in a big silo, but that was way too expensive. I looked at trying to have gravel move up a conveyor belt to store energy. That was even more expensive. And even looked at a crane to lift up a big weight and lower that weight back down, and that was the worst. But then the eureka moment came, which was stacking blocks. If you could use computer vision to automatically stack blocks in a tower, the crane would have the use of many more times the weight because it was building a big tower. The computer vision capability to do this only recently became possible. The power of the GPU, the graphics processor unit, say an NVIDIA card, for $299 gives you so much computation now that you can build something to do that. So we built a computer-controlled crane with multiple arms that automatically lift 35-ton blocks to store 35 megawatt hours and got down to 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour. We're in striking distance of that magical number of 3 cents where we can beat the price of fossil fuel energy at any time of day. I feel that's so important to allow us to make our electricity renewably. After announcing this last year, we had a huge amount of demand. We're so thankful for everybody here who helped us spread that word. And basically, this is what it looks like. A wind farm with towers that store the energy. And the very first system is being built right now, right near Lugano in southern Switzerland, and it looks like this. It's the automated tower, stacking all the blocks, and we have demand for thousands of these units around the world, and we can't wait to deploy this as fast as possible. That was a way of using Moore's law and computation to solve a problem in the energy space that previously wasn't possible to get down to that price. That's just one example. Let me give you 2 others. Solar industrial heat. Electricity is what we need for many of our life processes, but solar industrial heat is used for almost all of our materials. all of this building, the steel, the concrete, all of the materials we use need high temperature heat and burn lots of fossil fuels. In fact, this is a graph of different temperatures that people use to make these materials. And everything on the right-hand side of this account for 20% of global emissions. So if we come up with a way to replace that heat with solar energy, that would be incredible. Well, right now, concentrated solar that makes a lot of heat from the sun maxes out at 600 degrees. But calcining cement, making hydrogen, those things take 1,000 to 1,500 degrees centigrade. So again, we tried to figure out a way to use Moore's law, more computation power, to allow solar energy to solve this problem. At a company we started called Heliogen, we looked at thousands of different ways, many, many different iterations, to try and computer control mirrors, again, using computer vision and AI to try and get that higher temperature and lower cost. We came up with a system that uses much smaller mirrors and computer vision to look at the field of mirrors, so that overhead it looks like this, and this is what the computer sees. The computer sees the individual reflections of every mirror in real time, and at 30 frames per second can make micro adjustments to get very, very high concentration ratios. It leads to something like this. Over on the right, instead of a large target where the sunlight shines, which might be 5 meters diameter and 5 meters tall, we're hitting a target that's the size of a basketball hoop, only 18 inches in diameter. So because all the sun's rays are going into such a small spot, we can achieve arbitrarily high temperatures. In fact, we can achieve temperatures a third the temperature of the surface of the sun. With those temperatures now, we can do many, many things. We can use less materials. We can use less labor to install this because it's all computer controlled now. We can use less calibration because it's continuously calibrated. And now we can make heat from the sun for also less than the price of fossil fuels. Only 1 cent per kilowatt hour, we can make this high temperature heat from the sun, much lower than it burning anything. It's the first time in history that you can actually make high temperature heat for cheaper than burning something. From the first time we had fire, we've never been able to do that, and I'm really excited that computation power is part of the answer to make that happen. With this, we can do many things. We can do solar desalination. We can do calcining of cement, as I said. We can make hydrogen. And we can do so many thermochemical reactions that I feel we can really make a big impact on reducing global emissions with this technology. And finally, what's the third thing we need to do to change the world? We need to go backwards in time. We need to take carbon out of the atmosphere. We've put so much up there. It's very hard to filter CO2 out of the atmosphere, and we're putting so much up there. I told you about that. This is also unbelievable. Since I started my talk, the last 10 minutes, we've put 1.5 billion pounds of CO2 in the atmosphere across the world. Another 1.5 billion pounds went in the atmosphere just since I started talking. So we need to take it out. It's very hard to filter it out because you need to move a lot of air to take out a ton of CO2. You need to move a coliseum's worth of air, 1.5 million cubic meters of air to get 1 ton of CO2 out. And that's very expensive. The existing methods are way too expensive. So we're looking at a new method to combine the energy storage of Energy Vault and the high temperature, low cost heat from Heliogen to build a system that will move the air, filter the air, use the heat to take the CO2 out. And it effectively is like a super tree. It's like a tree, but 100 times more efficient than a tree. So effectively, we can turn desert into forest. We can take 1 acre of land and do the equivalent of 100 acres of trees. With that, you could take a 390-mile square of desert and remove all of humanity's global emissions. Every plane, every car, every truck, every bus, everything you could take out. So I feel this is something we need to do in the next decade. There's $1 trillion to be earned by doing this, but only if we make the price lower than the existing price of fossil fuels. The money will flow to this, I believe, if there's that economic incentive. I think that will trump laws. I think that will trump any change in lifestyle if we can just make it so cost effective. And I feel that Moore's law is the angle to make that cost effective possible. Finally, look at this new decade. We're standing here. We have to do this in this next decade, I feel. What are the odds that all of us are alive in this exact moment of civilization where we're at this turning point and we can do it right now? Like, this is the time that I feel we have to do it. You look back to almost the time when every one of us was born. There were 300 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, going up at 2 per year, and now we're at 415, going up at 7 per year. If we can do all these things and go back in time, we can go back and give a planet to our children and grandchildren, the exact same one that we inherited. I really, really hope we can do that. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.
Next up, we will have Christian Kroll, who is the co-founder and CEO of Ecosia, a search engine that plants trees. Please tell us what you are adding.
Thank you very much. Yeah, hello everyone. Who of you actually already knows us so that all right, okay, quite good. I could almost leave already again and give you some of your time back. But for those of you who don't know us, so we're a search engine that plants trees. How does that work? So basically, you just type in your search term like in any other search engine, and then when you hit enter, we show you search results. And also right next to these search results, we show advertisements. So until here, everything is normal, like you would do on Google as well. But the big difference actually between us and Google is that we use the profits from these advertisements to plant trees. And this is how we've already planted over 80 million trees so far, which I think is quite awesome. So thank you. So yeah, so why are we planting trees? Trees, of course, are beautiful, but they also have a lot of positive factors for the people and the planet as well. So by planting trees, we can turn landscapes like this on the left into landscapes like this on the right. And if we do that, we not only generate income for the people who are planting trees, but the people then can actually generate additional income from harvesting products from the trees or like nuts or fruits. And also the trees are extremely beneficial for the local biodiversity and also for the local water cycle. So really what we're doing when we're planting trees, we are kickstarting an improvement process in an entire area. And of course, trees are also extremely good at capturing CO2. We've talked about a few, or we just heard about technologies, future technologies, but trees are actually already an existing technology that's extremely effective at absorbing CO2. We have tree planting projects where we're capturing a ton of CO2 for less than $2, which is just mind-boggling. And what I think is especially impressive about trees is how we could easily scale this up. So what you see here on this map in the green areas are areas where trees can and should be planted without any negative effects. And we actually have space for 1 trillion trees on this planet. And if we would plant these 1 trillion trees, we would absorb hundreds of gigatons of CO2. And these hundreds of gigatons is exactly what we're still missing if we're reducing our own emissions to hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. So we would not only to a large extent solve climate change, but we'll also address poverty, biodiversity crisis, and so on. So trees are awesome, and I could talk about trees for the entire day, but I won't. I also want to tell you a bit about us as a company. So yeah, we're a search engine. We're making 25 million in revenue. We have 50 million active users at the moment, and we're the 931st biggest website on the planet. That also makes us the biggest European search engine. Of course, I don't want to lie to you. Compared to Google, we're still rather small. We're doing that with a rather small team of only 50 people. And last year really seen amazing growth of 180%, which is awesome. But again, our main KPI is these 80 million trees, which is really what's driving us. So we're a typical Berlin startup. We have all the fancy things that you need as a Berlin startup, a hip office, free breakfast, and a ping pong table, and screens that look like the Matrix. So we have all that. But we also are these people. So apart from our team of 50 people in the office, we have actually thousands of people who are working in the tree planting projects, and these are actually the people who are doing the hard work for us. So yeah, and for me as a CEO of a company, a tech company that plants trees, I have the pleasure to visit these two worlds. This picture was actually taken on my last trip to Indonesia when I was sitting on a pickup truck, and just a few minutes later the pickup truck was going through a river and then washed away, and we all landed in the water, which was not that fun at this particular moment, but now, of course, it's quite a fun story. I'm saying this because I really live in a world where I'm basically living in a high-tech startup world, but at the same time, we're working also with very, very low-tech solutions. And I think the answers that we're finding because of that are very, very interesting. But we're not only trying to plant trees, we actually also, last year, we invested millions of euros in solar energy plants to provide all the power for our servers from our own solar energy plants. And we're also talking to a lot of companies and tell them, if we can do it, then you can do it as well. And one of our biggest partners is Microsoft, actually. And we hope that to a large extent, we also influenced Microsoft's decision on their carbon strategy. So yeah, we actually found a lot of the suggestions that we made in the release that was made 2 years ago. So that also made us very happy that we as a small company can have a lot of impact on others as well. What we also did, some of you, especially the German audience, might know us for, we tried to save the forest of Hambach. So forest of Hambach is an ancient forest that is located right to Germany's biggest... so it's located right to next one of the biggest coal mines on the planet, actually. And the company who's running that coal mine wanted to cut it down, and we thought this was a bad idea, of course, because we like trees, but we also don't like coal very much. So actually we made an official offer to RWE, the company owning that forest, and we wanted to buy it from them. Unfortunately, they didn't accept, but we had a lot of press talking about this. And this again asked the question, if in the era of climate change, if you own an ancient forest, are you still allowed to cut it down to burn coal afterwards? This just totally doesn't make sense. And of course, there were a lot of other people involved, but I felt like we were also contributing. And basically, by now, I think we can safely say that the forest of Hambach is gonna stay, hopefully forever, which is really great. So one other thing that we're trying to solve or improve is capitalism, I would say. So by now, some of you have or own or manage a lot of money, and maybe you want to buy us now because we're such an interesting company. I have to disappoint you, but this is not possible. So what we did, we turned Ecosia, which was a normal LLC company, so a normal business, you could say. We turned it into one of the first purpose companies. So what is a purpose company? We basically gave away most of our shares to a foundation, and this foundation will now make sure that we can never sell the company, and we can never take any profit out of the company, and that it can never be controlled by externals. So even if Google, Microsoft, or anybody else would come tomorrow and put $10 billion on the table, I could not even say yes, because it's legally not possible. And I wouldn't do it anyways, but... And what I think is really great about that, I mean, it got us a lot of press and a lot of people were talking about this, but now I really have so many entrepreneurs who are coming to me and asking for advice and who want to actually do the same thing, that I really have the feeling that something new is starting here. I mean, 99.9% of the planet is still running on this principle that we have to maximize profit and so on. But there is something happening, and I really find this movement very, very promising, because I think this could actually be the answer to turbo capitalism and some of the problems that it's causing. So I'm super happy about that. So in summary, one could say everything is great. Ecosia is doing really well, and I'm happy about it. But of course, you probably have seen this picture before. Who knows what this is? Just shout it. Yes. Say, come on. Temperature, yes, this is global temperature rise during the last decades, and it's not looking good. And I think many people, maybe after the talks you've heard here now, you've updated your knowledge, but there's still a lot of people who think climate change only means that that it will get a little bit warmer. That's not the case. Climate change could actually mean that within 100 years, our planet might be uninhabitable. So we're talking about billions of people dying. We have never seen something like this in the history of the planet before. And I don't want to be around when really, stuff is happening. So I'm super happy that this last year for me, that was the year when people were finally waking up. So I've been working on Ecosia for 10 years now, and I always asked myself, why aren't people talking about this? Why isn't everybody worried about climate change? And last year, thanks to Greta and a lot of other people as well, really society started waking up, and that made me really happy. And what I think is that we really, really need a revolution. So we need changes in all sectors of society and of our economy. And this needs to happen very, very soon. The best picture that I know from when we're talking about revolutions is this from Delacroix. and that was about the French Revolution. And I really hope that this revolution won't happen with weapons. And I also hope that Ecosia can be a role model. So I used my Photoshop skills to update that picture a little bit. So there you go. So yes, I hope that we as Ecosia, as a company, but also we as individuals can really be role models, because we need change and we want to help people do that change. And if you want to help us, then you can basically now just grab your phones and install the Ecosia app on your phone, and then then let's plant some trees together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian Kroll. Next up is Marian Leigh. She works as an app developer for the WWF, and she has developed an app that sustains our oceans. And how this is going to look like, she's going to present us now. Please welcome her.
We are the first generation that knows we are destroying the world, and could be the last that can do anything about it. This is a choice.
The food we eat, the things we buy, the way we live. We can win the biggest battles in the smallest moments. Are you for the world or against it? It's time to decide.
Hello, my name is Marian Leigh, and I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, the WWF. I want to raise a question. What can we do to be better to our planet? To answer this question, I want to take you on a little journey. A journey underwater. Just because it's a place that you don't see every day doesn't mean it's not there. The ocean covers more than 2/3 of our living planet's surface. It's home to spectacular ecosystems and treasured wildlife. No matter where you live, you never live far from the ocean's reach. The value of the marine life goes well beyond biodiversity. The ocean sustains lives for more than 1 billion people. It regulates our climate. It produces half the oxygen that we breathe, and it fuels the water cycles that produce fresh water and rains. But after decades of overuse and pollution, these services have been interrupted. This is a ghost net. A ghost net is a fishing net that has been lost or abandoned in the ocean. They are called ghost nets as they're almost invisible underwater. According to a scientific report of 2018, ghost nets make up to at least 46% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Even if they do break down, these nets never go away. They just become smaller pieces of plastic. Marine animals mistake them for microplastic for food and eat it. This hurts internal organs, it keeps them from eating, and it exposes them to toxic chemicals. So now, we understand that we must remove them from the sea. But how do we find them? Let's have a look at the Baltic Sea. Even in perfect conditions, you cannot see further than 8 meters in the Baltic Sea. you need to have the exact coordinates by 3 decimal places to even have the slightest chance of finding them. And retrieving nets is expensive and time-consuming. Now for the good news. After years of research, training, and testing, hard work alongside fishermen and regional diving experts, I'm proud to announce that the WWF has developed a method to tackle this problem. The Ghost Diver app. Kill 2 fishes with just 1 app. Or better, lets you rescue them. The app works in 3 ways. First, the verification of side-scan sonar. Side-scan sonar is a category of sonar systems that is used to efficiently create an image of large areas of the sea floor. Through this app, the WWF provides side-scan sonar hints of where these nets may be. Recreational and professional divers who use this app can verify this data. Anybody can help. This is, by the way, a plane and not a net. This allows us to, secondly, build up a database. We get better and better in evaluating side-scan sonar data, so we can use our innovative tools to identify the exact locations of the nets. But it's also, third, a reporting tool. Recreational divers, fishermen, anglers, anyone else that finds or loses a net can report it through this app. They can report other things too, for example, munition, which is a widespread problem in the Baltic Sea as well. With this app, we can retrieve ghost nets in the most efficient way possible. This is just the beginning. Every year, an estimated 1 million tons of ghost nets are waiting to be retrieved. We are the first generation that knows that we are destroying the world, and we could be the last that can do anything about it. Our behavior and the decisions that we take today will define the next 10,000 years. We are the generation with a choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian Leigh. Next up is a problem that probably most of you have already experienced, and it's called over-tourism. Just think of cities like Amsterdam, Barcelona, or especially Venice. And there's a company that has been working to find a way out of it, and I'm very honored to welcome our next speaker, Tao Tao, who is the COO and co-founder of GetYourGuide. Please give him a warm welcome.
Grüß Gott and good afternoon. My name is Tao. I'm the co-founder of Berlin-based GetYourGuide. We are a travel company using technology, and I'm very honored to be back in my hometown of Munich and talk about an issue that is very pressing nowadays. Many of the presentations we've heard today face and address the most pressing issue of our times, which is ecological of nature. That said, there are many, many other issues in our worlds today that are caused by an increasing amount of demand that is not matched by how we deal on the supply side. And those challenges are, in our case, when it comes to over-tourism, especially of the cultural and socio-economic kind. So I'm here today to address the issue of over-tourism in terms of what causes it, what are some of the symptoms that we observe, and what are some ways out of over-tourism that we must face and address today. Before we start, let me just tell you a little bit of why we should talk about over-tourism and why we're acquainted with the topic. At GetYourGuide, we are on a journey to give the whole world access to incredible experiences, and there are many of them in the world. This concept was born out of a personal experience. In 2007, my co-founder Johannes and we were traveling to Beijing for a student conference, and he booked his flights wrong. So he arrived a day early and was lost and confused and just completely overwhelmed by the hustle of the city and had a very negative experience. A day later, when I arrived, of course, everything turned very positive. I'm from Beijing, and so we turned a very negative experience into a positive one and also a business idea. And so at GetYourGuide, over the last 10 years, we've been building bridges, like the bridge that I helped build for Johannes, building these bridges that connects the global demand for incredible experiences, be it flying over the Grand Canyon, visiting national parks, going to up the Eiffel Tower, with a global supply of these experiences and the heritage and institutions that exist in the world. Now, the problem with over-tourism is that over-tourism puts these kind of experiences at risk. And so I want to talk a little bit first what we think is over-tourism. Can I just wave and you go to the next slide? Oh. One of the trends that we see, obviously, is an increasing demand for travel. And over-tourism can very much be defined by the unsustainable burden that we're putting on the cities that hurts three things. Number one, there is a degraded visitor experience. Clearly, visiting iconic attractions nowadays is very, very different than maybe 50 years ago. Secondly, we risk the preservation of cultural and natural treasures of many of the world's main destinations. And last but not least, there is a risk that we're driving a wedge and create a rift between travelers and locals. Let's talk about the first problem. How many of you have stood in line for, let's say, an Eiffel Tower or some major attraction and waited hours and hours in line? How many of you maybe traveled to a destination and have not been able to maybe see the Last Supper because the tickets were completely sold out? How many of you stood in front of, for example, the Mona Lisa, hoping for a quick glimpse, only to be overrun by the hundreds and hundreds of selfie takers? And so clearly the planet is becoming crowded. It's not the same lonely planet that maybe the generations before us have been able to experience. And that is probably, from a consumer side of things, the most visible side of over-tourism. However, going beyond the selfish reasons of over-tourism, we have to, of course, deal with the fact that these treasures are there to be preserved for future generations. A lot of these natural and cultural institutions are there to tell stories and mark things that have happened in history that go beyond the enjoyment of individuals. And this clearly is one of the main problems if we think about major museums where an inattendant customer just breaks a vase and destroys hundreds of years of history. And last but not least, and maybe this is because I'm an immigrant who has lived in 5 different countries, this is something that I care about a lot, which is travel is supposed to bring cultures together. Especially in these turbulent times when we talk more about building walls than to build bridges, this is something that truly matters. Travel is a positive thing with some negative consequences we need to deal with. However, one of the problems is if we don't treat the local communities with respect, with dignity, and sometimes with the space that locals deserve, we are increasingly turning them from ambassadors to antagonists. We're already seeing this in Barcelona, for example, when you saw these graffitis saying tourists are terrorists. And clearly this is not a situation that is sustainable and also desirable because travel is a positive thing, so that is a positive message to be preserved. So let's talk about what causes over-tourism. Clearly, the population has not grown by 10x in the last 50 years. However, what has changed are patterns on the consumer side that cause an overflow of the demand. The first one is a simple statistic. 60, 70 years ago, in 1950, about 25 million trips were taken. Today, that number has ballooned to more than 1.4 billion trips. In part, that is through the common availability of low-cost airlines, alternative accommodation, but also a rising middle class. Now, I think it's important to note that this is a positive thing, in fact. So, whereas in the past, travel was something that only the elites could do, now we're democratizing the freedom of access that allows everyone to bridge cultures, learn about the histories of different societies, and build the connections with foreigners in order to bring some of that spirit home as well. The second trend that's causing over-tourism is that experiences are becoming the new possessions. And this is one of the defining trends of the 21st century. Many studies, including a recent one by McKinsey, have shown that the consumption of experiences is now outrunning the consumption of goods by a factor of 4. We're seeing this in the travel industry as well, because our industry of experiences and tours and attractions is growing at 4 times the speed than the trend of booking hotels or flights. And of course, consumers are growing increasingly aware that the memory of a beautiful dinner with loved ones or taking in the beautiful sights of Petra will last way longer than the memory of what you got for Christmas last year. And of course, with the rise of social media, we're now even literally ascribing a value to these memories by the amount of likes and shares we get. And that concentration is driving even more volume into the most photogenic spots. So what is there to be done? On one hand, we have the negative consequences of a degrading customer experience, where the future generations may not be able to have the same travel experience that we have had. There's the risk of the preservation of the cultural and natural treasures that the most important cities in the world hold. And there's the risk that we're driving a rift between locals and travelers. Now, on the other hand, you have the positive effects. You have the increasing freedom that so many people are now able to travel the world and build connections with places and people in foreign lands. We're proposing multiple levers. At GetYourGuide, one of the things that we are doing is deploying technology. The first one sounds very simple to maybe some of you, but it's really just digital ticketing. Through digital ticketing, you're able to forecast, predict, and plan for overcrowding. Another benefit of digital ticketing is it shortens the lines at some of these major attractions. For example, we've been working with the Van Gogh Museum in the Netherlands and been able to increase capacity by 10% while decreasing the operational strain on the museum, which allows the museum to have more revenue to invest into the preservation and at the same time allowing for a better customer experience. Another example is you can use dynamic pricing to increase the loads in shoulder season and decrease the load in peak season. So you're simply using pricing. And that is something, for example, that we've rolled out with the Moulin Rouge over the last 12 months. A second thing that we can do, and a lot of travel companies now doing, is to promote off-the-beaten-path experiences. Now, clearly, Paris is not just the Eiffel Tower, and London is not just the Tower Bridge, but there's so many more riches and wealth in those places to see and visit. So in our app, we recommend off-the-beaten-path things, cooking classes, and other things you can do. Or in our own design tours, like GetYourGuide Originals, we can, for example, start the tour to the Acropolis in the shade of the crowds, tell you the story, and then have you go up and allow you to experience the splendors of that destination. Last but not least, we encourage travelers to offset the negative effects of their activities. So for example, in the recent flooding in Venice, we've now implemented a donation features where customers can voluntarily donate an additional amount for the preservation of these institutions. And with this Doge's Palace in St. Mark's, we've been able to get 20% of customers to donate voluntarily to these institutions. And that is something we're rolling out to even more attractions around the world. This is only the things we can do. Clearly, more needs to be done by communities and by destinations. The first thing we think is that cities need to invest into building the infrastructure to allow for an increasing demand from travelers. Number two, tourism boards need to be promoting off-the-beaten-path things. And some role modeling in tourism boards such as the Netherlands or Japan already doing this with resounding success. Also, just as we're putting a price on carbon, we need to be putting a price on the pollution and the noise and the damages that travelers are causing in these cities through sensible, moderate, but nonetheless necessary consumption tax for travelers. Last but not least, there's also something that we need to do as travelers. There's always the notion that we should travel like a local, live like a local, belong anywhere. But the reality is we are guests, we're visitors. So when we visit a destination, we should be treating it as if we were visiting somebody else's home, which is with respect and dignity. And so if we do all these things, deploy technology, get people to travel off the beaten path, collect more money in order to fund the investment into infrastructure, and develop an awareness that we're visiting somebody else's home, only then do we hope have a chance to preserve these treasures, enable future generations to have the same travel experiences we've had, and preserve the core value of travel, which is to bridge different cultures together. Thank you very much.
much, Tao Tao. By the way, we're going to talk about over-tourism and green travel tomorrow at around 11 o'clock on the Travel Tech panel as well. So if you're interested in this topic, please join us for this. Final speaker now for this session, Yannick Zehnder, the co-founder and CEO of the CEVEN blockchain network. And he is going to tell us what he is adding to Earth, health, and sustainability. Please welcome Yannick Zehnder.
Nur Präsentation. Schauen, ob das tut. A new Green Deal has been proposed for the European Union by Ursula von der Leyen last week. And we at CEVEN Protect, we want to contribute to the very same goals, to the same sustainability goals that are in this deal. We want to make this deal a fair deal between equal partners, between nature and us humans. Let me introduce you to Nature 2.0. Our company is a true DLD brainchild. It started on last year's speaker reception with my co-founder Peter talking to Alessia and Steffi about what we do. Steffi then introduced Peter to a few fellow like-minded people, and that's where the story begins. Following an example from New Zealand and Ecuador, a group of Indian lawyers set out to win a 10-year case race to give human right-like status to the River Ganges. Now, we asked, why not just put in a Clean Water Act? Well, the legal status of human rights triggers in every jurisdiction somebody to be appointed as honorable custodian for the river, meaning he, the custodian, has the obligation to protect the river and act on its behalf. Well, our visionary minds as blockchainers were vivified, and we set out to unchain the powers of decentralized technology by bringing nature onto the blockchain. We are called CEVEN, that's Elbish from J.R.R. Tolkien's world, for world, Earth. So I grew up very close to a small forest, privately owned small forest, and me and my friends, we made a sport out of climbing into the forest, sneaking in, climbing on top of the tree house, and poking around the pond. We communicated with the forest, and we clearly felt its value to us, but the forest could not communicate back with us. It had no voice. Now imagine a world where we, through technology, give nature a voice and the transactive powers to express and trade the values it has. Back to my childhood forest. The owners are now around 70 and say they want to give it away to a charitable cause. They currently have two options. They could give it to the church, the local municipality, or to a charitable organization such as the WWF, or they could create their own trust fund and appoint administrators that take care of the forest and take care of the cause that was defined for generations to come. Now today, we want to introduce a third way, a new way we believe has very, very disruptive potential. Imagine that these people donate the forest to itself. Now, the technical framework that allows for such a seemingly crazy idea, to be honest, is called Decentralized Autonomous Organization, or short DAO. A DAO is, in a nutshell, software code that can own things. And like in the foundation, value is allocated to a specified cause. But in contrast to the traditional foundation, the DAO is deeply decentralized, meritocratic, and disintermediated. Meaning, there is no more need for a custodian. And on top of that, we have a tool in the DAO that allows us to transact value within the DAO and with outside partners. We call that a nature value token. By transferring the ownership into the forest ownership into the DAO, we open up new gateways for participation by humans, machines, by legal entities, and by the forest itself. That part of nature that owns itself becomes a self-sovereign nature ecosystem. Too crazy, you think? Well, it's already here. A forest outside of Berlin was transacted onto a DAO a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, and it acts as a DAO and represents its own ownership. Now, what started as an art project, they're called Terra Zero, evolved into a movement called Nature 2.0 movement, and will soon become a new blueprint for other ecosystems to be represented by these technological means. Sorry. This could be, for example, a valley in the Alps that owns itself, or it could be a tiger sanctuary that is set up by the WWF. Current paradigms about ownership and about nature have to be overthrown to understand how revolutionary this concept is. Think about a protected savanna that hires its own rangers. Think about a forest that sells carbon offset certificates or the timber sustainably to the local sawmill. Or think about a secluded valley in Peru that monetizes on the license on the antiviral properties of a rare plant that was found there. These are only a few examples of what Nature 2.0 and decentralized systems like these are capable of. The key is to provide a voice based on objective data to the legal, economic, social, and political dimensions and all other dimensions the forest has. Organized in a DAO, the forest is enabled to give a voice to these dimensions and to express them in value. With such systems, the social impact and, more importantly, the efficiency of charitable causes is greatly improved. The disintermediation of these systems makes them much more cost-effective, and they can be a novelty blueprint for governance for new causes such as Terra Zero or existing causes such as the World Wildlife Fund. But do not fear Morpheus handing out red and blue pills soon, or Agent Smith hiding behind every tree, because technology is merely an amplifier for human behavior, and it is in our hands to amplify the good. If we enable the forest to amplify good, it does not only benefit the forest, but it does benefit us humans as well. The current landscape of these Nature 2.0 ecosystems is still very small. There are a few pioneers working on it, and that's very valuable, but on a global scale, they won't move the needle. So we built CEVEN Protect to be the catalyst, to be the enabler, and to be the connector of all these ecosystems. Let me take you on a hike through our self-sovereign forest. So, it's a beautiful place, it's peaceful, there's tons of trees, they're growing, they're thriving. You enter the forest and you see piles of timber ready to be picked up. The timber was put there by a contractor that was hired by the forest to take down the trees. Also, the forest puts tons of CO2 back into the earth. Therefore, it has the capability of selling CO2 offset certificates. You check your phone for the map, making sure you're on the right path, and you see them advertised right there. Now, we passed by a small plot where very young trees are freshly planted. We could have done that in collaboration with Ecosia, for example, and the trees are taken care of and protected by the DAO. Now, on our way out, we're friendly greeted by a ranger. This ranger was hired by the DAO to check on the health of the trees and the livestock living in the forest. The money needed for that was gathered by the DAO by selling the timber, the certificates, and organizing hunting trips to manage the local deer population. On the way home, at the train station outside of the forest, you see a sign that tells you how to donate to the forest or even become an active participant in the DAO. So next time you hike in the forest and you pick up trash, you can get reimbursed for it. How cool is that? For all those activities, the self-sovereign nature ecosystem needs two things. It needs open source code for the DAO, and it needs data to act. It needs data to be active. And this data is mainly location data and a time axis or change detection within the system. In technical terms, geodata and geointelligence. Based on this objective data, the forest can draw conclusions, create models, and take decisions, or those that own the forest. At CEVEN Protect, we set out to be the provider of all of these elements. We provide the smart contract framework for the DAO. We provide the geodata and the geointelligence as a service to these DAOs to ensure that they can run safely. What we want to do is we want to supercharge the adoption of self-sovereign nature systems. We want to pave new ways for other ecosystems to grow and for large-scale sustainability projects such as the Green New Deal by Ursula von der Leyen to grow and thrive. But we want to make this deal a good deal. We want to make it a good deal between us humans and Nature 2.0. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Yannick, Zehnder, and thank you so much to all of these wonderful speakers that we've heard the last 70 minutes. And I think it's very obvious that these have been such great ideas on how we can fight climate change. And as you've heard, I want you to talk to each other. Maybe you take some of these ideas and develop an even stage further. So there is no planet B. So let's fight.